The execution happened at 04:13 local time on a strip of broken landing pad outside the relief hospital at Veyran Crossing. There were 47 cameras watching because Commander Tor Veyran had ordered them there. He wanted the recording transmitted to every border station, every contested colony, every ship that still carried the pale blue markings of emergency medical neutrality. He wanted the message to be clean. No translation errors. No witness statements softened by distance. No rumor that could grow smaller as it passed from mouth to mouth. The galaxy would see what happened to those who interfered with the Directorate's campaign. The human medic was kneeling when the broadcast began. Her name was Dr. Mara Ellison. She was 34 years old, born in the inland city of Gaborone, trained at the Nairobi Orbital Medical College, assigned for 6 years to the Earth Relief Service, and known to most people who worked with her as the kind of doctor who misplaced her own meals because someone else needed help before she got around to eating. She had dirt on one cheek. There was blood on her sleeves, most of it not hers. Her field jacket had the white band of medical neutrality on the left arm and the small Earth emblem stitched below it. A blue planet no wider than 2 human fingers. She was not crying. That was the first thing the witnesses remembered later. Not the weapon, not the soldiers, not even Veyran's voice. They remembered that she was not crying. She looked tired in the way medics look tired after too many hours under bad light, but her hands were steady. One hand pressed a folded dressing against the chest of a wounded Veyran boy no older than 14. The boy belonged to the same species as the soldiers surrounding her. He wore a conscript strip around his throat, which meant he had been old enough to carry ammunition and young enough to be told that carrying ammunition was honor. Commander Veyran stood in front of her with his ceremonial sidearm in his hand. He was tall even for his people, plated across the shoulders, with silver rank rings embedded into the armor along his spine. He had been a successful commander for 20 years because he understood theater. Battles mattered, but witnesses mattered more. A burnt depot could be rebuilt. A frightened population would rebuild itself in the shape you wanted. That morning, with the relief hospital behind him and the medic nailing in the dust, he believed he was shaping the border forever. He read the charge in a clear voice: unauthorized protection of enemy personnel, obstruction of Directorate military process, refusal to surrender listed prisoners for legal processing, collaboration with armed insurgents. It was all language that sounded official enough to hide what had actually happened. What had happened was simpler. Mara Ellison had treated everyone who came through the hospital doors: Directorate soldiers, League fighters, colonists, children, prisoners. People without uniforms, people whose uniforms had burned off. She had refused the order to separate patients by allegiance because her hospital did not have an allegiance. It had triage tags. When Veyran finished reading, he asked if she wished to make a statement. The cameras moved closer. Somewhere behind the soldier line, a nurse from the Veyran City clinics made a small sound and then covered her mouth. Mara looked at the commander, then at the boy under her hand. She adjusted the pressure on the dressing because the bleeding had changed. Only then did she speak. "He needs a surgical seal within 6 minutes," she said. "If you move him, he dies. If you wait until you are done performing, he dies. There are 4 sealed kits in the second tent. Use the green one. The yellow one is contaminated." Veyran stared at her for a moment. It was not the statement he wanted. It gave him no fear to display and no apology to reject. It gave him only a medical instruction, delivered as if his weapon and his cameras were inconveniences in the middle of an emergency ward. "Your final words are an instruction to us," he said. "My final words are not about you," Mara said. The translation reached the border networks 8 seconds later. On Station Kathra, a dockworker stopped loading fuel cells and looked up at the wall display. On the neutral freighter Luminous hand, a navigator whispered that the human was insane. In the Galactic Council's emergency observation room, a junior analyst named Leo 10 began recording the feed without being told. He had watched 3 years of border cruelty reduced to procedural language. This looked different. This looked like someone tearing the language away. Commander Veyran raised the sidearm. The boy on the ground tried to move. Mara's hand pressed him back down, gentle and firm. She did not look away from him until the last second. The weapon fired once. The broadcast continued for 9 more seconds before someone in the Directorate relay office cut the feed. Those 9 seconds were enough. The recording reached Earth in pieces. The first version was badly compressed and missing sound after the shot. The second came through an independent courier relay with the translation layer intact. The third was raw, copied from a council monitoring archive and delivered through a diplomatic back channel by someone who did not sign their name. By the time the sun rose over Geneva, where the Earth External Office still kept its old stone building facing the lake, 31 versions of the execution had been authenticated. Director Elena Reyes watched the raw recording alone in a secure room with the lights down. She watched it once because she had to. She watched it a second time because she had spent 28 years in diplomacy and knew the difference between anger and evidence. She watched it a third time without sound, studying the soldiers, the wounded boy, the angle of the cameras, the relief tents in the background, the 2 directorate officers standing half a step behind Veyran who looked away just before the weapon fired. When it ended, she sat still for a long time. Her aide knocked once and entered only when Reyes said yes. He had a folder in his hand. It contained the council's preliminary note delivered at unusual speed. He did not read it aloud. He simply placed it on the table. Reyes opened it. The language was careful. It acknowledged the deeply regrettable event. It urged restraint. It noted that the Veyran Directorate had already asserted lawful battlefield authority over the region. It recommended an emergency review panel, a preliminary fact-finding period of 90 days, and a moratorium on unilateral military movement while the Council assessed jurisdictional complexity. Reyes read the note twice, then she closed the folder. "Where is the body?" she asked. The aide swallowed. "Still at Veyran Crossing. The Directorate has not released it. They say Dr. Ellison was convicted under local military law and remains evidence in an active security matter." "And the hospital?" "Seized, some staff detained, some transferred. We do not have a full list yet. The wounded were moved to a holding camp north of the crossing." Reyes looked at the dark screen where Mara Ellison had been alive 3 minutes earlier. "Get me Fleet Command. Then get me the Relief Service Archive. I want every patient list from that hospital, every supply request, every evacuation denial, every name. If she wrote it down, I want it." "Oh yes, Director." "And send the Council our initial response. 1 sentence." The aide waited. Reyes said, "Return the body, release the wounded, surrender the officer who gave the order." The sentence went out at 08:20 Geneva time. The Council called it unhelpfully direct. The Directorate called it an insult. Several neutral governments called it understandable but unrealistic. The Veyran press called it proof that humans had never properly understood galactic sovereignty. The networks argued for 6 hours about whether Earth would file a formal complaint, whether the relief service would withdraw from the border, whether Dr. Ellison's death would become one more tragedy folded into the archive of tragedies that made everyone sad and changed nothing. Earth did not argue. At 14:00, every Earth embassy in Directorate space closed its public channels. At 14:05, all civilian Earth vessels within 12 jumps of the border received reroute orders. At 14:12, the Earth Relief Service changed the status of Veyran Crossing from compromised to active hostage site. At 14:30, the old emergency medical bell in the Geneva building rang for the first time in 46 years. It was a physical bell, bronze, installed after the plague evacuations on Ceres, kept mostly because institutions are sentimental about the objects that once saved them. The sound carried through 3 floors and made people stop walking. At 15:00, Admiral Jonah Vale entered Fleet Command's lower briefing room and found Director Reyes already there. She was standing before a wall display showing the Veyran border, the relief hospital, The holding camps, the directorate garrisons, the shipping lanes, and 47 red markers where Earth citizens or protected medical staff were confirmed detained. Vale had gray hair cut close to the skull and the patient expression of a man who had learned, over a long career, that most disasters are not improved by dramatic faces. "Well, you saw it," Ray said. "Oh, yes. The council wants 90 days. Vale looked at the map. "Of course it does. Can you move?" "We have been moving since the first authentication cleared." Ray's turned to him. "I did not authorize that." "No," Vale said. "Dr. Ellison did." He brought up a second display. It showed ships, but not the ships most people imagined when they thought of Earth fleet. No bright carriers, no famous battleships, no parade formations. The vessels on the screen were narrow, matte black, and ugly in the practical way of two. Alls built by people who cared about function first and appearance never. Their registry names were not public. Their drive profiles were not in the council database. Their crews did not attend diplomatic port calls. Officially, they were long-range recovery assets, designed for hostage retrieval, plague zone evacuation, and operations in systems where broadcasting your arrival meant killing the people you came to save. Unofficially, sailors called them the Silent Fleet. There were 68 of them ready within the first hour, 29 rescue cutters, 12 command and coordination vessels, 10 electronic suppression ships, 8 surgical hospital platforms with fold-capable trauma bays, 6 boarding carriers, 3 vessels that appeared on no display at all except as blank spaces in the formation map, because even inside Fleet Command there were things only 4 people in the room were cleared to see. Reyes looked at the numbers. How long? First elements can cross the outer Veyran sensor net in 9 hours, Vale said. If they are still using the same patrol rhythm they used last month, they will not see us until we are already inside the hospital perimeter. And if they changed it? Then they will see ghosts and argue with each other until the ghosts open their airlocks. For the first time that day, Reyes almost smiled. It disappeared quickly. Rules of engagement, she said. Medical recovery first, detainee extraction second, evidence capture third. Directorate military assets are to be disabled, not destroyed, unless they fire on hospital platforms or evacuation craft. If they do that, the local commander loses the privilege of being treated as confused. Reyes nodded. I need the body returned. Vale's face changed slightly. Not much, enough. Yes. And I need Mara's patient lists protected. The Directorate will try to erase them. They can try, Vale said. At 1640, the Council sent a second message, longer than the first. It warned Earth that unilateral action could destabilize the entire border and endanger ongoing mediation. It urged all parties to avoid escalation. It proposed a joint observer mission to the hospital site to depart in 12 days pending security guarantees from the Directorate. Director Reyes did not answer. At 17:05, Commander Veyer gave an interview from the captured hospital courtyard. He stood in front of the same tents where Mara had worked. The blood had been washed from the landing pad, but water had only spread the stain into a pale brown shadow. He said the execution had been lawful. He said humans were emotional and naive. He said the Directorate regretted the necessity but would not tolerate foreign interference under the disguise of medical service. He said Earth would understand in time that the border obeyed strength. At 17:07, the lights in the captured hospital went out. Not all at once, that would have looked like a power failure. They went out in sections, clean and deliberate. First the outer floodlights, then the command post, then the vehicle depot, then the officers' quarters. The emergency lights inside the medical tents remained on. So did the warming units in the pediatric ward. So did the surgical lamps above the 2 tables where local nurses were operating with shaking hands and no idea why the building had suddenly become so quiet. A Directorate corporal standing at the western gate looked up and saw nothing in the sky. He lifted his comm unit to report the outage. It produced only a soft hiss. He turned toward the command post, and that was when the first black shape descended through the low clouds without running lights, without engine roar, without the theatrical thunder of invasion. It settled behind the hospital like a piece of night lowering itself to the ground. The side opened, humans came out. They did not shout. They did not fire warning shots. They wore dark medical armor with white bands on the arms and carried compact weapons pointed down until someone gave them a reason to lift them. The first group moved toward the patient tents. The second moved toward the detention block. The third moved directly to the communications tower, where 3 Directorate technicians were still trying to understand why every screen showed the same impossible message in 12 languages. Medical site under Earth relief protection. Remain still, do not touch patients. The corporal raised his weapon because training reached him before judgment. A human officer turned her head. She did not yell, she did not threaten, she fired once. The shot struck the weapon, not the corporal, and knocked it smoking from his hands. The officer pointed at the ground. The corporal put his hands up. He would later tell investigators that the worst part was not the speed. It was the disappointment on her face, as if he had interrupted something important with foolishness. Inside the northern tent, Nurse Talon of the Veyran City Clinics was changing a bandage on a EG prisoner when the flap opened and 3 humans entered. She froze. Everyone froze. The lead human lifted both hands, palms visible. Earth relief, he said through the translator. We are here for the patients. Who is in charge medically? Talon tried to answer and discovered her voice had stopped working. She pointed to herself because it was easier. The human nodded. Good, tell me who cannot move. That was all. No speech about revenge. No demand to know where the soldiers were. No questions about allegiance. Tell me who cannot move. Talon understood suddenly and with a force that almost made her knees give way that the hospital had changed hands, not because a flag had been raised, because someone had asked the right first question. At the detention block, Commander Veyran was found in the administrative office with 2 guards, 1 legal aide, and Dr. Ellison's field journal locked in a transparent evidence case on the desk. He had not expected Earth to arrive. That was recorded later in his hearing, but anyone watching the helmet feed could see it in his body. The brief pause before anger. The flicker of confusion before authority tried to rebuild itself. This is Sovereign Directorate territory, he said. Major Samira Holt, commander of the first recovery team, looked at him through a visor dark enough to show him his own reflection. No, she said, this is a hospital. You forgot the difference. The guards reached for their weapons. Both weapons shut down in their hands. One guard stared at his rifle as if betrayal could be repaired by staring. Holt stepped forward and removed the evidence case from Veyran's desk. Commander Tor Veyran, she said, you are being detained for the unlawful execution of protected medical personnel, seizure of neutral patients, obstruction of emergency care, and conspiracy to conceal patient records. You will be transported alive. You will receive medical treatment if needed. You will be allowed counsel. These are not favors. These are standards. Veyran's throat plates lifted in fury. You have no authority here. Holt leaned close enough that the translator caught the quietness of her voice. You executed the person who would have argued hardest that we should be careful with you. I suggest you spend the rest of your life appreciating the irony. The first operation lasted 26 minutes. In that time, Earth recovered 112 patients, 23 detained staff, 7 children hiding in a laundry room, Dr. Ellison's field journal, the hospital's internal medical records, and the sealed remains of Mara Ellison from a refrigerated evidence vault beneath the command post. The silent fleet lost no personnel. The Directorate lost no lives. The hospital lost 1 door, 3 weapons racks, and every illusion that it was still under Directorate control. At 1802, Director Reyes sent the Council a status update. It contained no apology and no argument, only a list. Dr. Mara Ellison recovered, 47 Earth relief staff recovered, 112 protected patients recovered, Commander Tor Veyran detained, Hospital functional, evacuation in progress. The council chamber erupted within minutes. Several delegates called Earth's action an invasion. Several called it a rescue. A few tried to call it both and discovered that language did not enjoy being twisted that hard in public. The Veyran representative demanded immediate sanctions and the return of Commander Veyer. The League representative, whose wounded fighters had been among those taken from the hospital, demanded that Earth be given a security corridor to evacuate every patient still trapped in the region. The neutral bloc asked for time to review the facts. The small states asked, very quietly, whether Earth could review several other missing medical stations while it was already there. Junior analyst Leo 10 sat in the second observation tier and watched the room divide around a thing everyone had known but few had ever said. The council was very good at preserving process. It was much less good at preserving people when process became a place to hide from responsibility. The Veyran Directorate sent warships. They did it because governments that build themselves around force often mistake surprise for temporary disorder. They assumed the hospital recovery had been a raid, sharp and limited, the kind of thing that worked once and failed once the target understood. Admiral Rusk of the Directorate 3rd Spear brought 32 ships into orbit above Veyer Crossing and broadcast a demand that all human vessels surrender for inspection or be fired upon. There were, according to his sensors, only 2 human craft on the ground and 1 medical platform rising slowly with patients aboard. The larger Earth formation did not appear. His tactical officer reported atmospheric interference, possible sensor jamming, possible equipment fault. Rusk told him to correct it. The officer tried. The dispel. I remained mostly emptied. Aboard the Earth command vessel Quiet Mercy, Admiral Vale watched Rusk's ship settle into firing arcs around a hospital platform full of evacuated patients. He had been expecting something like this. Not because the Directorate was foolish in some unique way, but because institutions under stress often reach for the oldest tool they have. The Directorate's oldest tool was intimidation. Vale opened a channel. His face did not appear on the Directorate screens, only his voice. This is Admiral Jonah Vale, Earth Fleet Medical Recovery Command. You are placing weapons locks on a hospital platform carrying wounded personnel from 7 species, including your own. Break those locks. Rusk answered with visible contempt. You are in violation of Directorate space. Break the locks. You have 1 minute to surrender. Vale looked at the tactical display. The silent fleet was not where Rusk thought it was because Rusk's instruments were still looking for ships that wanted to be seen. Vale's ships were running cold along the planet's magnetic shadow, tucked into weather noise and debris fields using passive guidance and old-fashioned patience. They had arrived before the hospital raid began. They had simply not announced themselves. Admiral Rusk, Vale said, this is your one warning. It is also the last warning any Directorate officer in this theater will receive about targeting medical craft. Break the locks. Rusk gave the order to fire. He never finished saying the second syllable. The 32 Directorate ships did not explode. They went blind. Every external targeting array on every ship failed in the same 3-second window, not destroyed but severed from the fire control systems with surgical precision. Then their engines dropped to station-keeping minimum. Then their internal communications filled with a calm recorded message instructing crews to remain seated, keep hands clear of weapons controls, and wait for boarding inspection. On Rusk's flagship, the main display finally updated. It showed 68 human vessels around him, above him, below him, and behind him. Some were so close that his own hull cameras could see their matte surfaces against the planet's storm glow. They had been there the whole time. Rusk's tactical officer whispered a religious phrase his species had not used much in public since it became modern. Rusk did not rebuke him. He was looking at the nearest human vessel, which had no visible gun ports and still felt somehow like a hand resting on the throat of his fleet. Why did they not fire? The officer asked. Rusk had no answer. The answer was in the name the sailors had given the fleet. Silent did not mean gentle. Silent did not mean harmless. It meant disciplined enough to choose the exact moment when sound mattered. Earth had not sent the fleet to make noise. It had sent the fleet to remove options. The second operation began before the first had finished. Earth did not stop at Veyran Crossing because Mara Ellison's field journal made stopping impossible. Her notes were not poetic. She had not written for history. She had written like a doctor trying to keep too many people alive with too few supplies. Page after page listed names, injuries, allergies, family contacts, evacuation priority, and the small practical details that separate a person from a statistic. Cannot sleep unless sister nearby. Hates blue nutrient gel. Speaks only low Veyran. Lost left hand but asks about mother before pain medication. Soldier Directorate 16 maybe says he has not eaten in 2 days. League fighter pregnant, do not move without brace. At the back of the journal was a list titled Missing Transfers. 43 patients removed from the hospital by Directorate security before Earth arrived. Next to each name, Mara had written the unit that took them, the direction the vehicle went, and whether the patient could survive transport. 16 entries were marked unlikely. Director Reyes read the scanned journal in Geneva while the first recovered patients were still being loaded onto hospital platforms. She stopped on the missing list. The handwriting was clean until the last 6 names, where fatigue had made the letters lean. Reyes touched one finger to the screen, not sentimentally, but as if holding the page still. "We'll find them," she said. Well, the silent fleet began to spread. Not like an invading armada, not like a conquering force, like a search pattern. Ships moved to detention centers, transfer depots, prisoner yards, emergency morgues, abandoned clinics, field command posts, and transport hubs. They followed fuel receipts, medical supply serial numbers, intercepted guard chatter, tire marks, heat ghosts on roads, blood type requests, and the stubborn logic of Mara's notes. In one town, they found 6 patients in a basement under a municipal archive. In another, they found a burned ambulance convoy and followed the tracks of the vehicle that had stopped long. Enough to steal the morphine before leaving the wounded behind. At a river crossing, they found 32 civilians locked in a grain warehouse with no water, and a directorate notice on the door classifying them as security-adjacent persons pending review. Everywhere the humans arrived, they asked the same questions first. Who cannot move? Who needs medicine? Who is missing? That repetition did something to the border that weapons could not have done. People began answering. A Veyran farmer transmitted coordinates to an Earth relay and then sat awake all night waiting for soldiers to come arrest him. Instead, a human rescue cutter arrived at the coordinates and recovered 4 wounded League scouts from an irrigation tunnel. A directorate clerk copied a transport ledger onto a personal drive and dropped it into a public waste chute behind a ration office. Because he had seen the execution and then seen the hospital lights stay on during the raid, and could no longer make the 2 facts live quietly together in his head. A child in a camp near Breath Hollow drew a map on the inside of a food wrapper and gave it to a nurse, who gave it to a smuggler, who sold it to no one because even smugglers sometimes know when a thing should not be priced. The map led Earth to Site 9. Site 9 did not exist in Directorate records. It was built into an old mining complex below the basalt ridges north of the crossing, shielded by industrial radiation and listed in local surveys as collapsed. It held patients who had been politically inconvenient to kill and medically inconvenient to keep. Some were League fighters. Some were Directorate conscripts injured by their own artillery. Some were civilians whose family names made them useful. 4 were Earth relief staff taken from smaller clinics during the week before Mara's execution. The Silent Fleet did not storm Site 9. It turned off the elevators. It sealed the vehicle tunnels. It filled the guard barracks with sleep gas calibrated by species and body mass. It opened the medical wing doors manually because the power grid inside was unstable and nobody wanted a patient lift failing halfway through the operation. Major Holt entered with 2 trauma teams and found 68 people in rooms that had numbers instead of names. One of the Earth relief staff was a medic named Jonas Bikel. He had a broken jaw, 2 cracked ribs, and the look of a person who had spent several days deciding not to die because dying would be administratively convenient for the wrong people. When Holt cut the restraint from his wrist, he tried to speak. Later, Holt said. He shook his head and pointed with 2 fingers to the room across the hall. Inside, they found the boy from the execution broadcast, the one Mara had been trying to save. He was alive. His name was Iron Voss. He was 15, not 14, and he was Commander Veyer's nephew. The file on the door listed him only as Directorate Juvenile Asset, non-priority. The surgical seal Mara had demanded had been applied badly, late, and only because a nurse who had heard her final instruction found the green kit and used it before the soldiers could stop her. Iron was feverish, septic, and awake enough to flinch when the humans entered. Holt looked at the medical chart. She looked at the boy. Then she called for immediate evacuation. One of her officers, young enough that anger still arrived in him faster than discipline, stared at the family name on the chart. "This is Veyer's blood," he said. Holt turned. "Then Dr. Ellison died saving the family of the man who killed her. Make sure the record says that accurately." The officer's face tightened. "Yes, Major." Iron Voss survived because a dead human doctor had left an instruction, and because the humans who came after her were not there to balance cruelty with cruelty. They were there to finish the work she had been doing when the shot was fired. The galaxy began watching differently after Site 9. Before that, many had watched with the comfortable distance people keep when a conflict can still be labeled complicated. After Site 9, the labels started to rot. The footage of the recovery teams moving through the underground ward was not dramatic in the way war footage is dramatic. No explosions, no heroic charge, just light moving over beds, gloved hands lifting blankets, medics reading tags. A human officer pausing beside a sedated Directorate soldier and pulling the blanket higher over his shoulders before moving on. The kind of mercy that embarrassed everyone who had been explaining why mercy was procedurally difficult. The council convened an emergency session that lasted 18 hours. The Veyran representative repeated that Earth had violated sovereign territory. The Earth representative, a quiet woman named Patris Ngo, waited until he finished. Then she played Mara Ellison's execution, not the whole recording, only the last 20 seconds, the commander reading the sentence. Giving the instruction about the green kit, the shot, the 9 seconds after. When the screen went dark, Ngo said, "Sovereignty is not a license to execute medics and disappear patients. Earth will continue recovery operations until every person removed from protected care is accounted for. Any government that wishes to help may contact our coordination office. Any government that wishes to obstruct should understand that we will document that choice carefully." The Veyran representative accused Earth of threatening the council. Ngo shook her head. "No, we are taking notes. You may decide why that frightens you." That line spread faster than the execution had, not because it was louder, because it explained the human response in a way the galaxy had been struggling to name. Earth was not raging blindly. Earth was watching, recording, remembering, and moving with a calm that made every previous excuse feel temporary. The Directorate tried to adapt. It moved prisoners away from known sites. It cut local networks. It ordered all medical records transferred to military custody. It threatened families who communicated with Earth. It flooded public channels with stories about human aggression and foreign abduction. It announced that Commander Veyer had been unlawfully kidnapped and would be rescued. It declared Admiral Rusk's disabled fleet the victim of cowardly electronic sabotage. It promised a decisive answer. The answer came in the form of the Hammer Choir, the Directorate's oldest and largest battle group. 80 warships, 2 heavy carriers, 6 siege platforms, and a command vessel named Sacred Law. The choir had ended rebellions on 4 worlds. It had broken blockades, flattened cities from orbit, and turned the phrase "final warning" into a cultural memory across the border. Its commander, High Marshal Sarn, was older than Veyr, colder than Rusk, and too experienced to believe the humans were simply lucky. Sarn studied the reports for 6 hours before moving. He saw the pattern. Earth preferred disabling strikes. Earth protected medical craft. Earth avoided casualties when possible. Earth cared about records. Earth cared about witnesses. These were not weaknesses exactly, but they were boundaries, and every boundary could be pressed. He ordered the remaining hidden prisoners moved onto 3 armored transports and placed in the center of his formation. Then he broadcast their presence openly. 219 protected patients, including 19 Earth relief personnel, were now aboard Directorate military vessels. Any attack on the choir would endanger them. Any boarding attempt would be treated as piracy. Any continued Earth advance would be blamed for whatever happened next. High Marshal Sarn expected the humans to stop. For 11 minutes they did. The silent fleet held position beyond missile range. No transmissions, no visible movement, no dramatic reply. In council chambers and border stations and private homes across 17 systems, people watched the tactical feed and felt the shape of the trap. If Earth attacked, hostages might die. If Earth withdrew, the Directorate would learn that medical prisoners could be used as shields. If Earth negotiated, the hostages would become currency, and every clinic on the border would become a future bank. Aboard Quiet Mercy, Admiral Vale stood over the display with Director Reyes on a secure line beside him. Major Holt was present from the recovery carrier Solace Knife. Dr. Ellison's field journal lay in a sealed case at the center of the table because Vale had requested it there. Not as a relic, as a reminder of mission priority. Options, Reyes said. The tactical officer listed them. Electronic blackout had a 60% chance of disabling the transports without harming life support. Too low, boarding during blackout would require crossing overlapping fields of fire, possible but costly. Negotiation would buy time but also allow Sarn to move deeper into fortified space. A precision engine kill on the 3 transports might work if the choir did not respond by venting compartments. Too many unknowns. Major Holt said nothing for most of it, then she pointed to the formation map. Why are the transports there? The tactical officer frowned. Center position, maximum protection. No, Holt said. Why there specifically? They are too close to the command vessel. Sarn is careful. He would not put hostage transports close enough to complicate his own maneuvering unless he needed them close. Vale looked at the map again. Then he saw it. The 3 transports were not just hostages, they were relays. Their life sign telemetry was tied directly into the choir's command authentication network. Sarn had built a dead switch into his own formation. If the transports were taken or disabled incorrectly, the command vessel would know before the humans could hide it. Can we spoof the telemetry? Vale asked. The electronic warfare officer looked personally offended by the difficulty and pleased by the question. If we can get within 200 kilometers. We cannot, the tactical officer said, not without being seen. A voice from the back of the room said, you can if you do not bring a ship. Everyone turned. The speaker was Chief Annika Okonkwo, recovery engineer, the kind of person who looked at official impossibility as a scheduling problem. She brought up a maintenance diagram of the armored transports. Directorate prison transports use external waste heat vanes. They vent every 19 minutes under load. Small opening, not enough for a shuttle, enough for a package. We send 3 passive drones in cold. No engine. Just trajectory, inertia, and a bad idea with math around it. Drones attached to the vanes crawl into the telemetry spine, mirror the life signs, and keep the command vessel convinced nothing changed while boarding teams cut in from the underside. The room was quiet. Ray said, "How long would you need to build these packages?" Okonkwo shrugged. "We built them during the 11 minutes everyone was talking." Vale looked at her. She looked back. "You asked for options. We dislike arriving empty-handed." The drones launched 3 minutes later. Nobody outside the silent fleet saw them because they were dark, cold, and smaller than debris. They drifted through the edges of the hammer choir like scraps of dead metal corrected course with puffs of gas too small for enemy sensors to separate from background noise and reached the transports just as the heat vanes opened. One drone missed and spun away into darkness. The second attached. The third attached. The missed drone corrected using a maneuver Okonkwo later described in her report as ugly but spiritually committed, and attached on the second vent cycle. The telemetry mirror began. On Sacred Law, High Marshal Sarn watched his hostage life sign display remain steady. On the 3 transports, human boarding teams cut through the lower maintenance skins with tools that made no sparks. They entered through sewage recycling compartments, which history would later remember less nobly than the boarding teams deserved, and moved upward deck by deck. The first hostage deck held Earth relief personnel and local nurses. The second held League wounded. The third held Directorate prisoners who had become inconvenient after asking why medics were being executed. The fourth held children taken from clinics because family leverage was still leverage even when governments gave it clean names. Major Holt led the team on Transport 2. She moved through a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and fear, stepping over sleeping guards and counting doors. At door 17, she found a Veyran nurse holding a scalpel in both hands like a weapon. The nurse was trembling so hard the blade tapped against the door frame. "Earth relief," Holt whispered. The nurse stared at her, "Dr. Mara." Holt's face changed. "No, we came because of her." The nurse lowered the scalpel and began to cry without making sound. The extraction took 34 minutes. The hostages were moved into shielded cargo bladders attached to the underside of the transports, then transferred in waves to silent fleet rescue craft hiding in the engine wash shadow of the choir's own carriers. It was absurd. It was dangerous. It worked because the Directorate had built its doctrine around enemies that announced themselves by attacking. It had not built doctrine around people who would crawl through waste vents to avoid harming the prisoners being used as shields. When the last hostage cleared Transport 3, Vale opened a channel to High Marshal Sarn. "You are holding protected patients aboard military vessels," Vale said. "Release them." Sarn's jaw plates lifted in something like amusement. "You are not in a position to demand anything." "Release them." "Or what?" Vale nodded to the electronic warfare officer. Every life sign display on Sacred Law went blank. Then the internal cameras of all 3 transports activated at once, showing empty decks, sleeping guards, cut restraints, and one human drone in a corridor facing the camera as if posing for the historical record. Across the choir, command officers stared at screens. On the council feed, delegates leaned forward in disbelief. High Marshal Sarn stood very still. Vale said, "Or you will discover that the leverage is gone and you are now simply pointing guns at rescue workers. I recommend you reconsider." Sarn fired. Not at the hospital craft, not at the transports. He fired at Quiet Mercy because pride under humiliation often looks for the nearest face. The first volley crossed the dark between fleets and struck the space where Quiet Mercy had been 12 seconds earlier. It was no longer there. None of the silent fleet was where the choir's targeting system said it should be. The electronic ghosts bloomed across Sarn's display, dozens of false signatures, then hundreds, then a pattern T. Hat made his formation hesitate at the exact wrong moment. Earth answered. The silent fleet did not unleash annihilation. It dismantled. Engine clusters failed, siege platform stabilizers locked, carrier launch rails fused shut, missile racks opened and found their guidance cores politely dead. Communications narrowed to emergency bands and one open channel carrying Vale's voice. All Directorate vessels power down weapons and prepare for inspection. Medical personnel will be treated. Injured crew will be evacuated. Officers involved in hostage transfer will be detained. This action will continue until you stop making it necessary. The Hammer Choir lasted 22 minutes as a battle group. It lasted much longer as evidence. The evidence changed everything. The boarding of Sacred Law recovered orders signed by Sarn, Veyer, and 3 members of the Directorate War Council. The orders did not merely authorize the use of patients as leverage. They described a full policy of medical denial, an effort to break civilian resistance by controlling treatment access. Relief clinics were to be infiltrated, patient lists copied, high-value wounded removed, and foreign medics intimidated into withdrawal. Dr. Ellison's execution had not been an excess by a theatrical commander. It had been a signal to implement a doctrine. Earth released the documents in sequence, not all at once. Sequence mattered, first the execution, then the hospital records, then Site 9, then the hostage transports, then the policy orders. Each release came with names, dates, chain of command, survivor lists, and requests for missing persons. No speeches, no dramatic music, just the administrative skeleton of cruelty, assembled until no one could pretend it was a misunderstanding. The Directorate's allies began using careful language, then less careful language, then no language at all, only cancelled visits, suspended arms shipments, frozen credit guarantees, recalled observers, and quiet messages to Earth asking whether their own detained citizens had appeared in recovered records. The Council, which had asked for 90 days, formed an emergency tribunal in 6. Leo 10, the junior analyst who had recorded the execution feed, was assigned to the Tribunal Evidence Office because he had been foolish enough to do the right thing early and competent enough that no one could remove him gracefully. He spent 14-hour days cataloging recovered files. He saw Dr. Ellison's name hundreds of times, on supply requests, on patient transfers, on complaints to local commanders. On a message sent 3 days before her execution to the Earth Relief Coordination Office. The message read, "They are taking patients at night. I need observers, evacuation permission, or enough witnesses that they become ashamed to lie. If none of that is possible, send more bandages. People are still arriving." Leo sat with that message longer than the archive schedule allowed. Then he marked it priority evidence and attached it to the chain that proved premeditation. It was not his job to feel proud of the dead. It happened anyway. Commander Veyer's hearing began on a neutral station called Pelagos, chosen because it had no Directorate presence, no Earth military base, and very good translation systems. He appeared with legal counsel and the stiff confidence of someone who believed law was a maze he could still navigate if given enough corridors. For the first 3 days, his defense argued jurisdiction. For the next 2, it argued battlefield necessity. On the 6th day, Earth called Iron Voss. The boy entered slowly, still recovering, supported by a Veyran nurse on one side and a human rehabilitation tech on the other. He looked smaller than he had in the execution recording, because broadcasts make symbols out of people and hospital rooms turn them back into bodies. He sat in the witness chair and did not look at his uncle. Earth's council asked him what he remembered. Iron remembered heat. He remembered the landing pad. He remembered Dr. Ellison's hand pressing the dressing to his chest. He remembered being afraid she would leave when the soldiers shouted. He remembered she did not leave. He remembered the words green kit. He remembered waking in Site 9 and being told he was non-priority. He remembered a human voice saying, "We came because of her." Veyer stared at the table through all of it. When the defense rose to question the boy, the lead counsel paused, looked at Iron, and then sat back down. There are moments when even hired language refuses to work. High Marshal Sarn's hearing was shorter. The document spoke with a clarity he could not improve. Admiral Rusk accepted responsibility for targeting the hospital platform and spent most of his testimony trying to explain how 68 human ships had surrounded his fleet without being noticed. This was not legally relevant, but the tribunal allowed it because half the military observers in the room also want Zed to know. Admiral Vale testified on the 12th day. He wore a plain dark uniform with no medals. The Directorate Council asked whether Earth had intended to frighten the Veyran state by deploying unregistered stealth vessels. Vale considered the question, no. No. We intended to recover patients and detain the people who executed a medic. Fear was not the purpose. It was a side effect of your clients understanding we could do that. The council tried again. Do you deny that the so-called Silent Fleet is a military instrument designed to violate sovereign borders? The Silent Fleet is a recovery instrument designed to enter places where delay kills people. Sometimes those places are plague stations. Sometimes they are collapsed mining colonies. Sometimes they are war zones where commanders shoot doctors and hide behind flags. The tool did not choose this case. Your clients did. Well, the clip spread within minutes. The Directorate collapsed in stages, not because Earth occupied the capital. It did not. Not because the League overran the border. It could not. The Directorate collapsed because too many of its own people had seen what it had done to the wounded and what the humans had done afterward. Soldiers who might have fought an invasion hesitated to fight hospital ships. Governors who had ignored disappearances demanded audits once their own children appeared on patient transfer lists. Fleet officers who had served under Sarn began leaking orders to protect themselves and discovered, too late, that leaks can become floods. Commander Veyr was convicted on all major counts. High Marshal Sarn was convicted. 3 War Council members were transferred to tribunal custody after their own security service decided that sheltering them would be more dangerous than surrendering them. Admiral Rusk received a lesser sentence because the tribunal found he had targeted a hospital platform but had not known about the broader policy. Rusk listened to the sentence with visible relief and visible shame, which was more than many expected from him. The larger law took longer. It was called the Ellison Convention by the public before the council had agreed to call it anything. The official title was much longer and less memorable, as official titles often are when institutions are nervous about history noticing them. It established protected medical neutrality across member space, banned the military seizure of patient lists except under independent review, required protected corridors for emergency evacuation, and created a standing rapid response body with authority to enter conflict zones when medical sites were attacked. Earth was given a permanent operational seat. Several major powers objected. Then the recovered records from sacred law were read aloud again, and the objections became procedural footnotes. The vote passed 91-7. Director Reyes signed for Earth with Mara Ellison's field journal on the table beside her. The journal had been sealed, scanned, copied, and entered into evidence, but Reyes had requested the original for the ceremony. Some delegates thought this theatrical. They were correct. Reyes had spent her career avoiding theater when possible. She had learned from Commander Veyr that theater was too powerful to leave entirely to people without shame. After the signing, the council chair invited her to speak. Reyes had prepared remarks. They were measured, diplomatic, and 5 minutes long. She looked at them once, then folded the paper. Dr. Ellison was not executed because she was a soldier, Reyes said. She was not a soldier. She was not executed because she was dangerous in the way armies usually mean that word. She was executed because she refused to let wounded people become property of the side that held the gun. The fleet Earth sent after her death was silent because the work required silence. Listening, counting, entering carefully, carrying people out. But do not misunderstand restraint for uncertainty. If you kill the people who kneel between war and the wounded, Earth will come for the wounded, the witnesses, the records, and then you. In that order, every time. Well, she stepped back. No one applauded at first. It was not that kind of speech. Then the Veyran city nurse Talon, present as a witness for the medical delegation, stood. One by one, others stood with her, not cheering, not celebrating, Standing because some moments ask the body to do something when language has been used up. Admiral Vale did not attend the signing. He was aboard Quiet Mercy, supervising the final withdrawal of Silent Fleet assets from the border. The ships left the way they had arrived, with little ceremony and fewer broadcasts. Some returned to classified docks. Some redeployed to Plague Watch. Two escorted the first convoy of Mara units into a region where fighting had stopped mostly because every armed group had become afraid of being seen near a clinic for the wrong reason. Major Holt visited T. He repaired hospital at Veyran Crossing once before leaving. The landing pad had been cleaned properly. The tents had been replaced by modular wards. A small plaque had been placed near the northern entrance, not at the execution site, because the staff did not want patients brought in under the shadow of a death. The plaque listed the names of all medical workers killed or detained during the Directorate campaign. Mara Ellison's name was one among many. That was how Earth had insisted it be, not smaller. Not larger, one among the people who had stayed. Iron Voss was there that day, moving carefully with a rehabilitation frame. He had asked to meet the humans who found him. Major Holt did not want a ceremony, so they met beside the supply bay while workers argued about inventory. "I do not know what to say," Iron told her. "You do not owe us anything," Holt said. He looked at the ward entrance. "She saved me." "Oh yes. My uncle killed her." Holt was quiet for a moment. "Yes." The boy's throat plates trembled. "What am I supposed to do with both things?" Holt looked through the open doors, where a human nurse and a Veyran nurse were trying to convince an elderly patient that refusing soup did not count as a political position. "Live in a way that does not make her wrong to have saved you," she said. Iron absorbed that with the grave seriousness of the young when they are given something too heavy and trusted to carry it anyway. "I can try." "That is usually where humans start," Holt said. Months later, when the border had settled into something that was not peace yet but had stopped being organized cruelty, the council released its final assessment of the incident. It ran 400 pages. It discussed sovereignty, medical neutrality, rapid response doctrine, intelligence failures, institutional delay, and the political consequences of the Silent Fleet's existence. It reclassified Earth from regional emerging power to first-tier humanitarian security actor, a phrase that made Admiral Vale laugh once and then ask what it meant. No one gave him a satisfying answer. Buried near the end of the assessment was a paragraph written by Leo 10. It was supposed to be a neutral summary of causality. It said that the execution of Dr. Mara Ellison had triggered an Earth response disproportionate to prior models of human diplomatic behavior. Leo read that sentence after writing it and disliked every word. He deleted it. Then he wrote something less neutral and more accurate. The Directorate believed it had killed one medic. Earth understood that it had attacked the idea that anyone could be too wounded, too inconvenient, or too politically costly to treat. The Silent Fleet was not sent because one human died. It was sent because of what she died doing. His supervisor read the paragraph, stared at it for a long time, and approved it without comment. On Earth, Mara Ellison came home in the rain. The ceremony was small by government standards and enormous by human ones. Her family was there. So were members of her medical unit, recovered patients who could travel, representatives from species that had once needed her hospital, and a Veyran nurse who stood near the back holding a green surgical kit like a relic she did not quite know how to put down. Director Reyes spoke briefly. Mara's mother spoke not at all. Her brother read a list of clinic supply shortages, because he said Mara would haunt them all if they wasted a microphone. People laughed, then many of them cried. Human ceremonies often do both because grief among humans has never been obedient. At the end, Admiral Vale approached the family and gave them Dr. Ellison's field journal, not the evidence copy, the original. It had been cleaned as much as possible, but one corner remained stained from the landing pad. Mara's mother held it against her chest with both hands. Well, did it matter, she asked. Vale did not pretend not to understand. Yes, he said, more than most fleets ever do. Historians argued later about when the galaxy truly changed. Some chose the execution broadcast. Some chose the first hospital recovery. Military scholars preferred the disabling of Admiral Rusk's fleet or the dismantling of the Hammer Choir. Legal scholars chose the Ellison Convention. Cultural historians chose the moment Talon stood after Reyes' speech because laws require witnesses before they become memory. Humans tended to choose a smaller moment. They chose the green kit. Not the fleet, not the tribunal, not the speeches. A contaminated yellow kit, a clean green one, a dying boy, and a doctor who used her last breath of authority to tell the people killing her how to save someone else. Everything Earth did afterward came from that point. The ships, the raids, the records, the law, the fear, the respect, the new medical corridors, the children drawing black rescue ships in school, the Veyran surgeon learning in an Earth ward. All of it unfolded from a single professional ruction given in the dust. That was why the first page of the Earth Relief Training Manual was changed. For decades it had opened with a statement about neutrality and service. After Mara Ellison, the page carried a shorter line. Well, the patient is the mission. Under it in smaller text were the words she spoke before the shot. Use the grain once. The galaxy remembered the silent fleet because it was frightening. That was understandable. Fear is loud in memory even when it comes from silence. But the people who had been carried out of Site 9, the nurses who had watched the hospital lights stay on, the patients who woke under clean blankets aboard Earth platforms, and the boy who became a surgeon remembered something else first. They remembered that after the cameras and the weapon and the speech meant to terrify the border, the humans arrived without shouting. They turned on the surgical lamps. They asked who could not move. They counted the missing. They kept the records. They carried the wounded out. And only after that did they come for the men who thought killing a medic would teach Earth its place. That was the lesson the galaxy finally learned. Not that humans were kind. Many species were kind. Not that humans were dangerous. Many species were dangerous. The lesson was that humans had built a civilization around the stubborn refusal to separate the two when it mattered. Their mercy had logistics, their grief had ships, their restraint had teeth. So when, years later, a warlord on a distant moon threatened to execute 3 volunteer surgeons unless an enemy city surrendered, his own officers begged him to reconsider. He laughed and asked if they were afraid of Earth. One officer, old enough to remember the first broadcast from Veyran Crossing, answered honestly. No, she said, I am afraid they will be quiet first. The surgeons were released within the hour. And somewhere beyond the mapped lanes, where rescue beacons whispered into dark frequencies and frightened people hoped someone might be listening, a black ship adjusted course without turning on its lights.